Good morning. Welcome to our Day 2020 virtual. Today we're doing a conversation with Paul Watson, the founder of Sea Shepherd Society, and this is a part of a series of our Day virtual offerings that will be continuing on throughout the rest of 2020 and into 2021. Captain Watson, welcome to the virtual program.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
So, Paul, you have had a storied career that is quite astounding. And some might call you, this is my nickname, but the bad boy of the seas. But in reality, you've been very, very active protecting the ocean for many, many years. You're the founder of the Sea Shepherd Society and also one of the co-founders of Greenpeace. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what got you going and what keeps you going.
Well, where I began doing what I'm doing, is that what you're asking?
Sure.
Well, actually, I started wildlife conservation, I guess, when I was 11 years old, because I was raised in a fishing village in Eastern Canada, and I spent the summer when I was 10 swimming with a family of beavers every day throughout the summer. And the next summer I went back when I was 11, and there were no beavers. So I began to ask why, and I found trappers had taken them all out. And that made me quite angry. So that winter, I began to walk those trap lines and rescue the animals and destroy the traps. And I guess I've been doing the same thing ever since. But when I was 18, I was the youngest founding member of the Greenpeace Foundation. And we sailed up to stop the nuclear testing up in Amchitka Island in the Aleutian Islands. And I was with Greenpeace until 77. And then I left Greenpeace to establish Sea Shepherd that year. Because I felt that there was a need to intervene. Sea Shepherd was protesting, and I just wasn't finding that was working for me. You know, hanging banners and taking pictures is fine, but I wanted to actually stop these things. And so I set up Sea Shepherd as an anti-poaching organization to directly intervene. And I also established an approach, a strategy, which I call aggressive nonviolence. And that is we will intervene, but we will not injure anybody, will not cause any harm. And 42 years later, I can proudly say that we've never caused a single injury to a single person, nor have we sustained any injuries, but we have shut down hundreds of illegal operations.
Well, thank you so much for your leadership, Paul, and it's so important that you have stood up for the oceans. There's been two red notices put on you, one by Costa Rica, one by Japan, for protecting wildlife, protecting the oceans. Tell us a little bit about why do they target you particularly and come after the Sea Shepherd specifically?
Well, you know, the Interpol red notices are usually issued for war criminals, major drug traffickers, and serial killers. And I'm the only person in the history of that Interpol red notice to be put on there for trespassing, conspiracy to trespassing. I actually didn't do it. It was conspiracy to trespass on a whaling ship. And this is all Japan's doing to try and stop our interventions against their illegal activities in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary. Costa Rica had me on there at the insistence of Japan, who leaned on Costa Rica to do that. And they put me on there for stopping a shark finning operation in Guatemalan waters at the request of the Guatemalan government. I was working with them. But last year, Costa Rica dropped the charges against me and took me off of that red notice with a change of government. Now, if there really was a criminal thing, they wouldn't have been able to do that with the change of government. Because of the new government, they dismissed it. I'm still on the list as far as Japan is concerned, but I've actually asked, had our attorneys asked Japan to actually bring charges in the United States, and they refuse to respond. They want to keep me on that list to keep me from traveling, but I don't think they really want me back in Japan. But we are working to get that removed. What Japan was hoping to do was to stop Sea Shepherd by stopping me. And what they discovered was that I'm not Sea Shepherd, and Sea Shepherd's not even an organization. Sea Shepherd is a movement in 42 different countries. We've got a dozen ships out there. Right now, there's about 200 volunteers on those ships, and they don't, I don't have to be there for it to be operated. What we created back in 1977 is now an international movement, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of. But I have to suffer the consequences of being on that red list. But considering all of the things that we've accomplished over the years, that's a small price to pay. And so whether I'll ever get off that list, I don't know. I don't really care. It did what we did. And last year, the Japanese whaling fleet left the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary and will never return. So for the first time, the Southern Ocean is free of whaling. In fact, as of last year, there is no whaling in international waters anywhere on the planet. And that's an amazing development, considering when we began, there were so many countries that were whaling. Whaling has now been pretty much 95% extinguished.
Well, thank you so much for that. And, I'm part of the Save the Whale movement of the 70s that you've been so influential in getting out into the world. And I just want to, on behalf of all of us folks that grew up in whaling communities like I did on Cape Cod, whose economies were originally based on that, and became aware maybe first largely because of that. Let's talk a little bit about where it still is happening. I know that there's some whaling up in the Iceland area, some islands in Denmark, and I think the Japanese have quote unquote scientific whaling in the Southern Oceans today.
No, Japan is no longer in the Southern Oceans. That's over and done with. All whaling now has been restricted to the territorial waters of basically 3 countries. Norway's number 1, Japan's number 2, and the Danish Faroe Islands are number 3. Iceland technically is there, but they haven't killed any whales for the last 2.5 years. And I think that they're going to end it. So really now we just have to focus on stopping Norway and Japan. But I believe that the Japanese whaling is dying out. Both in Norway and Japan, it only exists because of massive subsidies by the governments. Remove the subsidies, it's a dead industry. In fact, Japanese whaling was a dead industry 30 years ago. It's only existed because of these literally tens of millions of dollars thrown into it every year to keep it going. That's one of the major problems that we have on the planet today, is that unsustainable fisheries, for instance, are kept going because of these massive subsidies. It's about $75 billion a year that is pumped into subsidies internationally to support the world's fishing fleets. Without those subsidies, they couldn't exist. And the problem is that in order to get what is less and less, they need more and more sophisticated equipment. We're looking at $200 million super trawlers to go out there and, take incredible amounts of fish. And of course, to get those super trawlers, to get that highly industrialized machinery to really exterminate the fish, you have to borrow billions of dollars from banks. And because they're so far in debt, they have to catch more fish to pay off those debts. And it's a vicious circle. According to Dr. Broer's worm, Dr. Daniel Pauly, the 2 foremost fisheries biologists on the planet today, by 2048, there won't be any fishing industry because there won't be any fish. And the problem that we're dealing with is these industries are all there for short-term investment, for short-term gain. They really don't care about the survival of the fish in the future, because they just reinvest whatever the profits they make into something else. I mean, the day of the actual fishermen is over. These are corporations that are just using this as a way of, it's like, I guess you call it day trading in a way, in order to extract as much profit from the sea as they possibly can. And I call it the economics and the politics of extinction. And a good example of this is, let's take the bluefin tuna. It's been 90% reduced in the ocean. Now, they could stop fishing tomorrow for bluefin tuna and still supply their market. They have 10 to 15 years supply in warehouses in Japan. But they won't do that. And the reason they won't do that is that if they stop fishing bluefin tuna and the numbers begin to rise in the ocean, it will diminish the value of the fish in their warehouses. And if it goes extinct in the wild, while the fish they have in their warehouses becomes a priceless commodity. They're literally investing in extinction. And so this is a problem that we're dealing with fisheries all over the world. There is really no sustainable fishery anywhere in the world. The exception might be the Alaska salmon fishery, but that's it.
Right. And so being a former commercial fisherman myself and having witnessed this firsthand, when I spent some time up in Alaska in the early 80s, I realized that the proliferation of sea life in that particular area of the world was extensive. Having spent time in some migrating herds of hundreds of whales, I mean, I'll never forget it for as long as I live. But Paul, tell us a little bit about how much fish has been fished from the seas, let's say in my lifetime from 1955 until today. I think that we've seen the doubling of the human population, but at the same time, we've lost most of our fish, haven't we?
Yeah, well, since I mean, the year I was born, there's 3 billion people on the planet. Now it's approaching 8 billion. But the world's fisheries have declined steadily. And pretty much between 80 and 90% of the world's fisheries have been diminished. The only reason they continue to catch fish is by massive investments in technology, using everything from fish aggregators to satellites to sonar and everything to locate the fish. I mean, you know, Rayathon has a fish finder, and the motto of that piece of machinery is called, "The fish can run, but they can't hide." And that's the problem. They can't hide. There's nowhere for them to go. You know, we could learn from the Polynesians on this. For hundreds and hundreds of years. A shaman in the Polynesian cultures, they had this thing called kapu, which means that if anybody, when they declared an area kapu, for instance, a bay in Bora Bora, for example, if anybody was caught fishing in that bay over a 20-year period, or the period that they declared it as kapu, it was the death penalty. You know, they took this very seriously. And the reason being is that the Polynesians knew that if the fish disappeared, if the fish died, so would they. And so they took that very seriously. Today, there are no kapu areas anywhere in the world. There is no safe place. You know, we have, you know, marine reserves and sanctuaries, but that's where the poachers go. That's, if you want to catch fish, you go to the marine reserves and the sanctuaries, because there's very little enforcement. You know, that's why we have 300 Chinese vessels that are lined up on the borders of the Galapagos Park Marine Reserve, you know, just grabbing everything that swims out of that reserve. And of course, they venture in there. We've got so many poachers in there. I would estimate about 600,000 sharks are killed every year in the marine reserve of the Galapagos. And this is true of almost every sanctuary anywhere in the world. The problem also is that most of the world is under a state, well, it's like the Wild West. There's no enforcement of law because there are no laws. You can do whatever you want. And this is why when we go out and do what we do to intervene, we always throw it in their face. Well, you can't stop us because you can't stop them. So you can't stop us from enforcing a law that you're refusing to enforce. For example, the Patagonia toothfish poachers that were operating in the Southern Ocean, prior to 2015, they were taking about $100 million a year of fish out of there, the Patagonia toothfishes. First of all, the Patagonia toothfish is not, it's marketed under the name of Chilean sea bass. It's not from Chile and it's not a bass, but it's an ugly looking fish, but it's extremely valuable. And so it's been on the Interpol Purple List for many, many years, but nobody's done anything about it. So in 2014, we said, we're going to go after these guys. We were immediately pounced upon by the governments of Australia and New Zealand, saying, this is none of your business. You can't go after them. You can't enforce the law. You can't take the law into your own hands. And they even said that if we pull up any of those illegal nets, they would charge us with illegal fishing. Anyway, we ignored them. We went after them. 8 days after leaving New Zealand, we caught the most notorious toothfish poacher of all, called the Thunder. And that set into motion the longest pursuit of a poacher in maritime history. We chased that Thunder for 110 days from the coast of Antarctica to the equatorial West Africa. And our second ship, the Sam Simon, came along, and its job was to seize the gear that the Thunder had dropped. It took us 200 hours to pull in 72 kilometers of gill net weighing 70 tons. We had to pull that in. And meanwhile, the pursuit was going on with the Thunder. After 110 days, the Thunder, running out of fuel, with nowhere to go, because they would have been arrested because we were on their tail. We got Interpol involved by then. The captain of the Thunder decided to sink his own ship to destroy the evidence. We got it all on camera. But as the ship was sinking, we boarded that ship and we got the evidence. The captain ended up getting 3 years in prison, the 2 officers 2 years in prison, and the company was fined 17 million euros. And of course, the ship went down. And within the next year, we shut down all 5 other poachers, the toothfish poachers down there. We accomplished in 1 year what Interpol and the governments of the world refused to do over the previous 10 years. And I guess that's embarrassing. It's really embarrassing to a lot of these governments. While we were down in the Southern Ocean, the New Zealand Navy came upon one of the vessels that we were pursuing. And since the New Zealand Navy was there, we simply said, well, you take care of them. We're going to go on and pursue someone else. What happened is that the New Zealand Navy tried to board this Yongping was the name of the vessel. And they said no. And what did the New Zealand Navy do? They said, okay, and went home. Later, the admiral in the New Zealand Navy was brought before Parliament and asked why he did that. And he said, well, we considered it too dangerous. And they said, well, you know, Sea Shepherd was able to stop one of those vessels. Why couldn't you? And what the admiral said was astounding. He said, respectfully, sir, we're not Sea Shepherd. We're not pirates. I mean, in other words, there's a lack of political and economic will to enforce the law. And we're being punished for actually enforcing the law.
Well, thank goodness that you continue with your work and that certain philanthropists and sectors of society are funding your initiatives. I mean, how many ships does the Sea Shepherd actually have operating in which parts of the world today?
We have 9, and we're securing another 2 in the process of doing so. No, sorry, we have 10 and we're getting another 2. Right now we have 2 vessels, the Bob Barker and the Sam Simon, which are patrolling the west coast of Africa in partnership with various West African governments to stop poachers there. I have 2 vessels that are operating in the Mexico's Sea of Cortez in the Vaquita Refuge to prevent the extinction of the Vaquita porpoise. We have 1 vessel doing patrols in the Caribbean, the John Paul de Joria. We have another vessel in the Mediterranean, another vessel in the Baltic. Only one of our vessels is restricted now can't leave because it's in Singapore and because of the COVID restrictions, but we're hoping to have it out by the end of this month, and then it will be heading over to Latin America. We have now partnerships, that is agreements with various governments, including Peru and Mexico, Liberia, Gabon, Tanzania, and Namibia, and others. And getting more and more invitations to partner with these governments, mainly third world governments, although we have worked with the police in Sicily on stopping poachers there. So this is a new approach for us, but it is something that we began back in 1999 when we started a partnership with the Galapagos Marine Reserve, with the Galapagos National Park. And that has resulted in the rest of the dozens and dozens of poachers in the Galapagos Marine Reserve since then. Sea Shepherd doesn't carry any weapons, but what these partnerships give us is that we provide the resources, the volunteers, and the passion, and they provide the authority in the form of enforcement. So we take on their enforcement agents on board our vessels when we're operating in territorial waters. Outside of territorial waters, we operate in accordance with the principles of the United Nations World Charter for Nature, which allows for individuals and non-government organizations to uphold international conservation law, specifically in areas beyond national jurisdiction.
Wow, that's quite quite the coverage. You know, going back for a moment, Paul, to the Patagonian toothfish, aka Chilean sea bass. I still see it on menus periodically, and I know from watching your wonderful movie Chasing the Thunder that these fish take sometimes 100 years to get to, you know, full size, and they're living way down in very, very cold waters. Where are these other? Where is this? Where are these fish coming from today?
It's a complex thing. I mean, there is a legal toothfish fishery out of Australia and New Zealand with legal quotas, but most of it's coming illegally. In fact, I would say 40% of all the fish in every fish market and restaurant in the world has been caught illegally. And illegal fishing is probably one of the biggest threats to the survival of biodiversity on our planet right now. And it's they're all over the place. I mean, they're transshipment at sea is one of the big problems. What is that the fishing boats catch these things, they transship to a large vessel that freezes the cargo and then brings it to wherever. And there's really no tracing as to where the fish are actually coming from. We have been working with SkyTruth, they use satellite technology to find these vessels and what they're doing at sea, but they can only see it from space. We have to go in. For instance, last year we sent one of our vessels into the midst of the Chinese fleet south of the Galapagos, and we caught them in numerous violations. And all we can do there is really relay those violations to the appropriate bodies and hope things will be done, which very rarely they are. A couple of years ago, we caught a Chinese drift net fleet in the Indian Ocean. Now, drift nets have been illegal since 1992. And so we fully documented what they were doing, and then we began to chase them. We chased them all the way to China. And now this was really interesting. As we approached the Chinese mainland, there were 2 Chinese warships there. And the fishermen immediately said they were being pursued by pirates. And of course, the Chinese Navy contacted our vessel, the Steve Irwin, and said, what is this? And our captain, Captain Sid Chakravarti, said, we caught these guys using drift nets illegally. We've documented the whole thing. We've sent the information already to Beijing. And the Chinese Navy said, bring them in. And they allowed us to escort these vessels up the river in China. Those captains were arrested, lost their licenses, and the companies were fined. So if you can get the evidence and the documentation, they really have to take action.
Well, thanks again, once again, for your leadership. When I was working with Luis Cihoyos on the movie called Racing Extinction, I was shocked to find out that we were killing, the numbers are, it's hard to believe that we could be killing 100 million sharks per year for shark fin soup. Now, this is, of course, back in 2014-15 when we were making the film, but still, I mean, if those numbers hold, how can the global population of sharks sustain that kind of assault?
Well, I don't think they can, and that's why I think we're seeing a lot of diminishment in shark populations. They're not killed just for shark fin soup. That sort of lays all the blame on the Chinese. There's shark oil capsules, which are sold in health food stores all around the world they're sold as a cure for cancer because there's a myth that sharks don't get cancer. The shark skin they use it for making various materials. It's used in the computer industry. And now they want to kill 500,000, or 500,000 sharks they want to kill right now for COVID research. So, the sharks are coming under stress from so many different reasons, and a lot of this is being done illegally. You remove the shark from marine ecosystems, you cause irreparable damage. It's as simple as that. The shark is a very essential part of maintaining healthy marine ecosystems. And so we're doing this at our peril. And of course, it's easy. It's hard to get sympathy for sharks when the media is constantly portraying them as monsters. As you said, we kill 100 million sharks every year. How many people are killed by sharks every year? The average is 5. In fact, it's more dangerous to play golf than it is to go swimming with sharks. More people die on the golf course from bee stings and lightning strikes every year than are killed by sharks. But we've created this image of the shark as a monster, and therefore people have little sympathy for it. But we have to look at the ecological value of these species, and it's an extremely valuable apex predator.
So, Paul, it's really astounding to me that the Earth is as resilient as it is, considering how hard we've hammered it, particularly since both you and I were born, and that we've doubled the population and that since then and now, and here we are, still alive. Can we switch over a little bit? I'd like to talk about the impacts of the human population burning all of the carbon since the 50s until today, the impacts on the ocean. We know that the ocean is the largest carbon sink. We're seeing a great migration of species now from the mid-latitudes north as the temperatures begin to warm, and the thermal halides and so forth, the currents. If you wouldn't mind talking about that for a moment.
I just this month had a book published in France on climate change, and during my research, I discovered something rather enlightening, and that is the conditions that we're seeing right now, as far as the levels of carbon in parts per million in the atmosphere, are very similar to the beginning of the Permian extinction, 250 some million years ago, and caused by the same reason, for the release of carbon. At that time, it was volcanoes and burning Siberian coal mines and everything, but now we're releasing all that carbon, and we're the cause for that problem, creating what's now the sixth major extinction, the Anthropocene. So where is that going to lead? Probably in the same place that the Permian extinction went to, which is mass extinction. And that's a reality. So what do we do about it? I don't think that humanity really has the will to actually do anything about it, because a problem with the human species is this: an incredible ability to adapt to diminishment. This is what served us very well 30,000 years ago, when we had to adapt to diminishment. But now, as things become diminished, we simply accept that diminishment and move on to something else to exploit. If this was the year 1965 and I were to tell you that you'd be buying water in plastic bottles and paying more for that water than the equivalent amount of gasoline, you would have looked at me like I was completely insane. Nobody would do that, and yet here we are. As we remove one fish species, like say orange roughy, which was very popular in the 1990s, we just move on to another species. In fact, a species which is probably less attractive. I was raised in a fishing village in Eastern Canada. We did not eat turbot. We did not eat mussels. You know, they were considered garbage. And yet now that's what you get. You get turbot in a fancy restaurant in Paris. You know, we've adapted to that diminishment. And but there's only so far we can continue to do that until things are so severely degraded that there's no more further adaptation. I look at it this way: if you look at the Earth as a spaceship, which is what it is, and every spaceship has a life support system, and that life support system provides us with the air we breathe and the food we eat and regulates climate and temperature. And that life support system is run by a crew of living sentient beings that maintain the machinery. We're not crew. We're passengers. We're having a wonderful time entertaining ourselves, but we're not crew. But what we are doing is we're killing off crew members. And there's only so many crew members you can kill. The trees, the phytoplankton, the insects, the worms, the bees. There's only so many crew members you can kill before that machinery begins to fall apart and you no longer have a life support system. And that's what's happening right now. That's what's driving climate change, is the machinery is breaking down. And we're the sole cause for that. And yet we still have leaders of the most powerful countries in the world going up on television saying, well, there's no problem. This is normal. It's happened before. You know, climate's always changing. You know, yeah, and it's happened. And they say, well, I like it when they say it happened in the past. Yeah, and it didn't come out very well for a lot of species when it happened in the past, and it isn't going to come out very well for us. So if we're really concerned, which it doesn't look like we are, but if we're really concerned about our children and our children's children, we will take action. But at this rate, the whole political economic system is based on short-term gain, short-term investment for short-term gain, and to hell with the future. We don't have the vision to look into it. If you're going to be a conservationist, you have to look at the impact of what we're doing today on the next 1,000 years, on the next 1,000,000 years, because the future will be defined by our actions today. But very, very few world leaders think beyond the next election.
Unfortunately, that's true. You know, we here at the American Renewable Energy Institute and the ARDE Summit have been actively advocating, as you know, for the last 17 years to make a rapid transition from burning of fossil fuels to the use of clean technology and energy, wind, solar, biofuels, et cetera, at the speed and scale necessary to actually abate and then, in fact, return the ship around, if you will. We know that the Earth is very resilient when given a chance. Just the recent COVID lockdown gave us a snapshot of what that could look like if we just all of a sudden stop driving and stop consuming radical amounts of energy. I heard numbers along the magnitude of 20 to 30% less CO2 in that 3-month period globally. But the fact is that the feedback loops are now fast and furious, as we're seeing in the fires in the Northwest. and the derechos and the hurricanes and so on and so forth. Paul, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the leadership of the 195 countries that you mentioned, and particularly the United States and China, because the two countries together have about half the world's economy, the two largest economies in the world. Of the 80 trillion annual GDP, USA is 25, China's 15, together they make half. And that the two countries also put up about half of the CO2 throughput into the atmosphere. And even though right now we're at odds with China, it seems to me that the 1.5 billion people that constitute both countries needs to come together in some sort of a very real way. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your perspective and that of the Sea Shepherd Society regarding how we elect our world leaders and how we can give them mandates to go forward to address simply what I see as the most serious existential threat facing humanity. And of course, that's the slow burn of our atmosphere and the life support systems of planet Earth.
Well, our economic political systems are such that world leaders, politicians can't solve the problem. They simply cannot, they're incapable of making the decisions because they know they can't make those decisions. Back in the early 1980s, the Conservative Prime Minister of Canada, Joe Clark, decided that we Canadians had to pay the real cost of a gallon of gasoline. And he said, okay, we're going to raise the price to what it actually costs. Within 6 months, he was no longer Prime Minister of Canada. Any world leader that comes out with a solution which is going to diminish the lifestyle and the materialistic pleasures of their citizens is going to be tossed out. This, as Leonard Cohen said in one of his songs, we're locked into our suffering and our pleasures are the seal. Politicians are not going to say anything that's going to be unpopular. And that's why there's this climate change. I mean, just saw the vice presidential debates the other day. I mean, Kamala Harris seemed to go out of her way to say, oh, no, we're not going to ban fracking. Why would we do that? And she seemed to want to backtrack on the Green New Deal and everything because, let's face it, in the United States, you really have two choices, a Democratic or a Republican. And of course, and then you got the bizarre situation of Trumpism, but that'll go away. But will things really change after that? I don't really think so. And when you look at all social revolutions throughout history, the history of humanity, they all came about because of the passion and the courage and the imagination of individuals, not politicians. Abraham Lincoln didn't end slavery. That was the work of Wilberforce and Douglass. Woodrow Wilson didn't give women the vote. He signed the bill, but that was the suffering and the work of hundreds and hundreds of suffragettes who brought that about. The civil rights movement, the same thing. Gandhi is another example. You don't solve anything through politics. As Margaret Mead said one time, she says, don't depend upon governments or corporations to solve these problems. They never have, they never will. Change comes through the passion of individuals. I mean, look what Greta Thunberg has done, as far as getting the message about climate change on. And, she was able to talk to politicians all over the world and about things that they didn't really want to talk about, but she gave them really no choice about it. So my hope for the future lies with young people all over the world who are taking this to heart and following their passion and understanding. And I try to advise young people all the time is don't be deterred by criticism and understand that you have the power to change the world. You just have to harness what you're passionate about to courage and imagination, and you can change the world and just go and do it. And I'm really happy to see so many young people that are in fact doing that, who are involved. Because of Diane Fossey, we have Mountain Gorillas in Rwanda, which we wouldn't have if it wasn't for that individual person. Because of David Wingate, who is a biologist in Bermuda, the Bermuda storm petrel did not go extinct. And I can't think of anything more noble as a legacy than the fact that you lived and a species was prevented from going extinct or a habitat was protected from being destroyed.
It's a beautiful analogy, and I think that it's exactly right on the money to reference those who have gone to the mat as it were, for species that are flaming out. And it was one of my great pleasures to work on the movie Racing Extinction, because I felt that we could, put a real spotlight on that issue. But the unfortunate truth is that these species are flaming out, and they're flaming out and going extinct faster than we can even count them. Let's move back to the oceans in terms of the species. How are we? They say that the whales have made a comeback since we stopped hunting them 100 years ago, but I'd like your opinion on that, and maybe referencing the Vaquita and some of the other frontline species.
I wouldn't say the whales have made a comeback, but they are making a comeback, and their populations are slowly increasing, but they're nowhere near what they originally were. And whales are absolutely essential for a healthy ocean. I mean, they are the farmers of the ocean. They provide the nutrients, the nitrogen and the iron to the phytoplankton in the form of their fecal material, which they bring up from large depths. It's called the whale pump. And, one blue whale every day defecates 3 tons onto the ocean, and that's chock full of nutrients for phytoplankton. And when you diminish whale populations, you diminish phytoplankton populations, and phytoplankton populations have been severely diminished since 1950. So hopefully with the whales coming back, it will increase phytoplankton populations. But now we have plans by Norway and Japan to go down to the Southern Ocean and harvest, as they call it, literally hundreds of thousands of tons of plankton, zooplankton, but that also has an impact upon the phytoplankton. And what do they want to do with it? As a protein base for domestic animals, for factory farms, is really the reason for that, without any real environmental assessment as to what the impact of removing that amount of krill from our oceans will actually, what kind of consequences that will have. But our oceans are dying. It's as simple as that. Our oceans are dying. If the ocean dies, we die. I say that all the time and try to get people to understand that. It's very difficult because for the most part, humans are alienated from the ocean. What I've been trying to do also is to try and get people to think of the ocean in a different way. And what that is by saying, you're the ocean, I'm the ocean, we are all the ocean. Because what is this planet? It is the ocean planet. It is water in continuous circulation. Sometimes it's in the sea, sometimes it's locked in ice, sometimes it's underground, sometimes it's in the clouds, and it's always in the cells of every plant and animal on this planet. So that means that the water in your body right now was once in the sea, once in the ice, once underground, once in the clouds. It's constantly circulating. We are the ocean. Oh, the ocean is life. Water is life. And we're part of it. We're connected at every single level. We're so intimately connected by this element of water that it's what makes life possible and makes us possible. I mean, most of our bodies are just water. And we're befouling it in every way. We're befouling it when it's in the atmosphere. We're befouling it in the rivers and streams. We're befouling it in the ocean. We're befouling it in our own bodies. The antibiotics that we suggest, the chemicals in our bodies end up going into those ecosystems. So really, I think the solution, in my opinion, really, the solution is that we have to come up with a new way of looking at our relationship to the planet. And that is, we have to get rid of this thing called anthropocentrism, this idea that we're the only species that matter, that we're the be all and end all in the center of the universe. We have to get rid of that false thinking and adopt biocentrism, the attitude that indigenous people around the world have had for tens of thousands of years. The fact is that we're part of nature, that we're intimately connected with all of these other species. And unless we learn to live in harmony with all these other species, the actual crew members that run the machinery, then we're going to follow them into extinction. We're going to drive them into extinction, and we're going to follow them after that.
Wow, what a beautiful analogy. Thank you so much for that, Paul. I think that I'd like to conclude our interview with a beautiful story that you once told on the Our Day stage. And if you wouldn't mind recounting your experience with the sperm whale, where you had the opportunity to look into the eye of the whale and the connection that was made there.
Well, my teachers throughout my life have really been non-humans, first with the beavers, and then probably the most amazing lesson that I ever learned was in 1975. It was June 1975, and we had put together this plan with Greenpeace to save the whales. And the idea, we were reading a lot of Gandhi back then, the idea was to go out and find the whaling fleet and put ourselves between the harpoon and the whales. And that's what we did. We searched and we found the Soviet whaling fleet 60 miles off the coast of California. And Bob Hunter and I put ourselves in a small boat, and there we were in front of a harpoon vessel bearing down on us in full speed, and in front of us 8 magnificent sperm whales that were fleeing for their life. And every time the harpooner tried to take a shot, I would maneuver the boat to block the harpoon. And we stopped it for about 20 minutes until the captain on that boat came running down the catwalk and screamed into the ear of the harpooner, then looked down at us, smiled, and brought his finger across his neck. And that's when I realized Gandhi wasn't going to work for us that day. And a few moments later, this horrific explosion, a 250-pound explosive harpoon flew over our head, slammed into the backside of one of the whales in the pod. The cable slashed down like a sword right in the water right beside us, just narrowly missing us. It hit a female. She screamed and rolled on her side. And suddenly the largest whale in that pod slapped the water with his tail and disappeared. And he dove and he swam right underneath of us. And he threw himself at the bow of the Soviet vessel. And they were waiting there with an unattached harpoon. The harpooner pulled the trigger and sent that explosive into the head of that sperm whale bull. And he screamed and fell back in the water. He's thrashing about in agony. There's blood everywhere. And as he was rolling about, I caught his eye. And he dove again. And this time I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming at us real fast. And he came up and out of the water at an angle so that the next move was to fall down on top of us and crush us. And as his head rose out of the water and I saw his eye, an eye the size of my fist, I could see my own reflection in that eye. It was that close. And what I saw in that eye changed my life, because I saw, understood that the whale understood what we were trying to do, because I could see the effort he made to pull himself back. His head went back into the water, his eye disappeared beneath the surface, and he died. He could have killed us and chose not to do so. But I also saw something else in that eye, and it was pity, not for himself, but for us, that we could do what we were doing. Why were we killing them? We weren't eating sperm whales. We were killing them for oil, high heat resistant oil. And one of the reasons the Soviets wanted it so much was because it was an ideal oil for the construction of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I said to myself, here we are killing this beautiful, intelligent, socially complex, self-aware sentient being for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it hit me. We're insane. We're certainly insane. What are we doing? And that's when I decided that everything I would do in my life would be for them, not for humans, but for them, for all of us really, but primarily for them. And that's why I devoted my life to protecting life in the ocean ever since.
Well, it's a beautiful story. Thank you for recounting that. Now, my last question to you, Paul, is as a father, a new father, I know you have a little boy named Tiger, who was about 4 years old, and the fact you brought up Greta Thunberg, and we work with the global youth climate activists, Shea Bastida, Alexandria Villaseñor. Would you mind telling us how you see their work and our work together, AREI, the Sea Shepherd, all of our colleagues, moving forward from this point in 2020, a year I think that most of us can't wait for it to be over, quite frankly, but that we have a future generation to look out for, to provide a world for. Would you mind concluding our talk today with your thoughts about the future and the youth and what we can do perhaps in the upcoming election to ensure that?
I think that what we need to do is let children be children. And going back to the early 70s, I had an observation that really made me aware of the problem. That we were giving talks to a school in the Queen Charlotte Islands on the Haida Reserve there. And in the morning, we were talking to kindergarten kids, and then mid-school in the mid-afternoon, and then the seniors. And here's what happened. We went into the kindergarten class and said, anybody here speak Haida? They all spoke Haida. Anybody here know anything about whales? We just sat back and listened as they told us everything they knew about whales. By mid-school, only half the kids spoke Haida, and only half of them really cared about Wales. And by the time we got to the seniors, nobody cared. Nobody spoke any words of Haida. We had taken these beautifully intelligent children and turned them into idiots through our educational system. And that's, what we don't do. We need to encourage their intuition, their instinct, their natural abilities. We need to encourage that. We need to listen to them. And we're not doing that. In fact, we're trying to teach them to do this and teach them to do that. And I just find that, we can learn so much from children. So it's not a question of us teaching children. We can guide them, but it's really a question of the children can teach us, just as Greta Thunberg has been doing, and so many others have been doing. And that, I learned a lot just from listening to my own son, who was 4 years old. And we've got to stop thinking that we know what's going on, because we don't. We have proven that. We've proven that we don't have any idea what we're doing, and we don't even know where we're going. So let's start to let intuition take place. When I was a child, I did a couple of things that were interesting. One, I cut up the map of the world, and I put all the pieces together, and I said to the teacher, I said, I think there was one continent here one time. And she said to me, "Oh, that's stupid. You don't know what you're talking about." But I was right. Why was I right? Not because I was smarter than her, because it just intuitively made sense. And with children, these things make sense. But we're taught to dismiss our intuition. We're taught to accept what we're being told without question. And the same thing what we're having with these elections right now. All the stuff that they say, it doesn't matter whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats. They only want one thing, is to get reelected so they can have the power. They're really not going to change anything. Maybe in the future, I think AOC, I like the way she's going in that, but, and I certainly have been a big supporter of Bernie Sanders, but, anybody who has that kind of passion doesn't get anywhere, because the system grinds them down and spits them out. You've got to be, you got to kiss a lot of ass and conform in order to get anywhere in politics. And by the time you get to that position, you're pretty much useless as a person who has passion and initiative.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. That's a beautiful concluding thought for your